Should I do it up there? Good afternoon, everybody, and I won't be grabbing the gavel for this, even though it might be fun. So welcome to the first meeting of the Boundary and Governance Committee, and the very first thing that has to be done at the first meeting of a committee is the election of chair and vice chair, which, as always, I get the pleasure of doing. So first off, are there any nominations for the office of chair? Director Thorpe.
I'd like to nominate Mike Grenier, please. Director Michael Grenier.
Director Grenier, do you consent to the nomination? Thank you. Are there any other nominations for the role of chair?
I'll nominate Mike O'Reilly.
Director O'Reilly, do you consent?
Yes.
That was convincing.
And also a hand from Director Bass.
I was just going to do what Merlin did.
Okay. So are there any other nominations for the role of chair? One last time, any other nominations for chair? Okay, we have two directors who have been nominated and have accepted. So as usual, they will have 1 minute to speak, and we'll do that in order of nominations. So Director Grenier, would you like to address the committee?
Thank you for the nomination. I guess I come with some background in community building, and I think even more important, I come with a background of community building in a rural setting. And so understanding how rural works in order to propose something that is semi-urban is an interesting experience. I also come from a perspective of negotiating settlement agreements. So I negotiated the 6 Mile Economic Development Settlement Agreement, which was an agreement between the Secwepemc people, the province, and the private sector. And I think that's going to be important as we move forward with our Indigenous neighbors and our neighboring governments. We're going to have to look at that. So with that background, I'll say I'd be delighted if you want to have somebody with that background. I'd be delighted to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Grenier, for coming in at exactly 59 seconds. Director O'Reilly, would you like to address the committee?
That's impressive. I'm not going to get that close. I'd like to stand for chair on this. I brought it up with the previous board about 4 years ago. And really, I'm seen as a consensus builder and able to bring a team together and not just project specific, but multiple things. And when I talk about that, I've been president of multiple nonprofit boards throughout Kamloops and British Columbia. And that's really what I'm able to do is find commonality between a group of people to get to a consensus and a yes vote. I'm not hard on the boundaries on any side or on any one opinion. I work with the group to see what the group wants. And we will see where this goes. Thank you.
41 seconds. Thank you both. So now Marnie will distribute ballots to the members of the committee. Will you please write on there the name of the director that you would like to see elected chair? Yes, anyone who just writes Mike will be summarily insulted. So to confirm, all of the ballots have been cast? Fantastic. I guess I can already congratulate Mike on winning, but now Marnie and I will go count and find out which one. And congratulations to Director Mike O'Reilly for being elected chair of the committee. And then the next item would be the election of the vice chair of the committee, Director Bass.
I didn't ask her, but I'd like to nominate Lee.
We have two Lees as well, Director Bass.
There you go. Well, I know she doesn't want to do it, so, you know, I'm going with that, Lee.
Thank you. As long as I don't have to do a 1-minute speech, I would accept that nomination.
Wow.
Then let's find out. Are there any other nominations for the role of vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Tricia Thorpe.
Director Thorpe, do you consent?
Actually, no, I don't want to compete with Lee Onslow. I think she would do a fine job. And then she won't have to do a speech.
This is the first time I get to say this. Director Thorpe has declined the nomination. Are there any others? A final time, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Then I declare Director Onslow acclaimed as vice chair. So this committee now has its chair and vice chair.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging the TNRD that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district. Today, we are located on the Tecumseh to Secwepemc territory, situated with the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with the Tecumseh to Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Any additions or deletions from the agenda? Can I have approval agenda as presented? Moved by Director Blackwell, second by Director Grenier. All in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to reports 5.1, terms of reference review. Manager Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. And then, yes, if I could just let's pull them up on the screen. And that is so zoomed out that nobody's going to be able to read it. Okay, so we're starting with the Establishment and Authority, 2181 of the Local Government Act. I think the crucial section is in section 2, the mandate of the committee, the reason why you're all here. The committee's role is to identify the key issues that warrant a review of the TNRD's governance structure and boundaries, to identify the key priorities to examine the TNRD's governance structure and boundaries, to provide input on the development of a scope of work in terms of reference for the TNRD boundary review and study, and to provide input and feedback on a public consultation plan to share the study findings and seek public input. Put another way, this is terms of reference about how a committee will develop terms of reference for a study, and therefore it is Geek Central. So I hope you are all geared up for a fun time of paperwork. Membership, there are a maximum of 14 members. 11 of you are present today, and this is a two-year committee, so you will be serving until basically the term of the next election to the TNRD in 2026. Staff support, this will be, I say, we will be arranging agendas and minutes. The primary staff support are CEO and corporate and legislative services, and will act as liaison with the ministry. You will meet at least twice a year or as otherwise convened. Members will be appointed by the board. We have elected a chair and vice chair under 6.3. Agendas will be circulated. The committee meetings will be open to public unless closed under section 90 as usual. Minutes will be recorded and provided for signature, as that's all very normal. And you will bring forward any recommendations to the board for approval, because of course, as a committee, this body has no statutory authority to take decisions by itself. So as with, I think, all of our committees, you will simply be making recommendations for board action. And I think that is particularly important to bear in mind on a committee of this size, because technically you could form a quorum of the board. So you need, or just please bear in mind you are making recommendations to the board as a whole. So with that, I guess I say focusing particularly on the mandate, does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns at this time?
Discussion from directors. Seeing none, Manager Lois, do we need to vote on these TORs?
Chair, these terms of reference were adopted for the committee by the board, so this committee doesn't need to adopt them itself.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to 5.2, boundary review discussion. Manager Lois.
And thank you again. So now essentially, I think with an eye on those, the 4 items in the mandate, and in particular, A and B, identifying the key issues that warrant a review of the governance structure and boundaries, and identifying the key priorities to examine our structure and boundaries. So if I realize this is also hopelessly small, but here we've got this is the BC government's map of our regional district. As you can see, as you well know, we are a vast regional district, as we say in our land acknowledgement. We cover over 44,000 square kilometers. As Mr. Vieira likes to say, we're the size of Switzerland. Unfortunately, we don't have their beautiful mountain trains. So personally, I think that's something you should be looking at. I did also just want to pull up, there's a very useful Wikipedia article. I don't usually like to consider it reliable, but this kind of thing is just a nice, simple shorthand. I've highlighted on this table where the TNRD is. This is currently sorted by land area. As you can see, we are in the top, we're comfortably in the top third size of the regional districts across British Columbia. But that said, we are definitely not the largest. We're not even half the size of, say, the Peace River Regional District, and we are half the size of Northern Rockies. So not to say, of course, that means nothing needs to change, but it's just an example of how vast we are. With the issues that you're going to be considering and discussing, they will definitely be applicable in other areas as well. Well, that is assuming that you identify size as being one of the issues. Of course, being one of the largest, we are vastly larger than others. So, for example, we are 4 times the size of Okanagan-Similkameen, and we are about 20 times larger than the Central Okanagan Regional District. So there are a lot of regional districts which are smaller than us. There's a small number that are bigger than us. But essentially, we have vast geography with some fairly dispersed communities. As you're aware, about 2/3 of our overall population reside in the metropolitan region of Kamloops, but we do have some fairly major other communities. So, for example, the only other city within our regional district is the city of Merritt, about an hour to our south. It's the 2nd largest community in the TNRD, but it is less than 10% of the size of Kamloops. And then following on from that, we have other communities like, say, other smaller incorporated municipalities, like, for example, Ashcroft and Clearwater, and other communities within our electoral areas, such as Tabiano, Blue River, etc., which are all going to have their own unique needs. So essentially, I think I was hoping that this could be quite freeform and give the members of this committee a chance to start looking at what your concerns are, what your priorities are, what you think works well and badly, what you would like staff to start writing reports and doing research on. And as I say, with a key to look at the mandate, identifying the key issues that were under review and identifying the priorities. And then that will feed into the scope of work and the review and study terms of reference.
Thank you, Councillor or Director Bass.
Thank you. Mr. Lois, well, the geographical span is integral. I'm more interested in the size of the different districts, because my concern here has been and continues to be the size of this board, particularly as we start to incorporate UNDRIP and our First Nations partners who should have a seat at this table, I believe. So in terms of, I appreciate the geographical, but do they also have huge boards like we do? And are any of them looking at similar things that we're looking at right now?
I thank you, Director Best, through the chair. I believe the TNRD is the largest board within British Columbia. Second largest, I apologize. So we are certainly an unusually large board in that regard. I know that there are other ones that are as small as only 4 members. There is, I think, I want to say Central Coast Regional District. There's only 4 or 5 members. So they are definitely significantly different in board size. As the Government of BC looks to incorporate UNDRIP into legislation, there's definitely an open question about what the future will look like in terms of Indigenous representation and participation in board meetings. As things with the current state of the Local Government Act, then First Nations can only sit on this board if they run for election and get elected in the same way as any other resident of the regional district. But there have definitely been some question marks and suggestions in, I think, wider political discourse about whether or not First Nations will become essentially part of the board and start appointing their own members and representatives. So you are, I think, correct. As things currently stand, this board is only going to look at getting bigger, and that's definitely something that I think you would want to be considering.
So my supplementary
Supplemental.
would just be this comment, which is, I don't want to wait for the province to decide. I want to be ready when the province does decide so that we don't spend a few more years making it happen. So that's the only reason I'm on this committee. I want us to be ready for when we finally acknowledge the fact that we should have our First Nations neighbors involved with our regional districts.
Thank you, Director Laird.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just have a question on why our board is so big. Like the city of Kamloops has 7 members and all the other municipalities only have 1. Is there a reason why there's 7 members from the council on this board? Is it because of the per capita, 2,500?
Yeah, and I'll let staff take over, but ultimately it's set by the letters patent through the province of British Columbia. But Manager Lois, if you want to round that out, please. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair. Absolutely. The size of a board is set in letters patent, so it's not, it absolutely can be changed, but the way that would happen would be a board recommendation to request that the government or the Lieutenant Governor in Council issue revised letters patent to change the size of the board, the number of directors, and the voting strength that came with that. So I think the outline reason, certainly not the specifics, and this could of course be changed if letters patent were altered, but I think the outline reason why Kamloops provides 7 members and the other municipalities provide only 1 is simply population disparity, as I indicated, with the city of Kamloops providing around and again, this isn't mathematically precise, but approximately 2/3 of the entire regional district's population. The thinking would be that the city has not only more votes to cast, but more people to cast them. And so that's certainly the exact number of that is something that the board could look at requesting that letters patent be revised to alter.
Supplemental?
I noticed from, in 2000, there was only 4 members from Kamloops Council, and I understand now it's because of the population growth. Basically, that's where our extended size of our board comes in, and plus the new municipalities that have come on board. 3 new municipalities and basically 3 more members from council, Kamloops Council. So that's 6 more just from what we're dealing with now.
Director Houghton?
I think I said this when we were talking about this a while back, but I think this regional district is fairly unique, even though we're large in landmass. We're also got a lot of small unincorporated communities within the boundaries of regional district, folks like Clinton, Chase, District of Clearwater, District of Barrier. And then you have our 10 electoral areas that are buried within the midst of that and on the surrounding end of it. And I think all of them are unique in whether they're small EAs or small communities, they're all unique. And I don't think there's you can't lump a bunch of them together and say, oh, we'll have one candidate for a bunch. You probably could, but they're not going to get the representation that I think we give to the residents within the regional district around this table for the communities and the electoral areas and the rural areas we serve. We got to be very careful with that. Thank you.
Director Grenier?
Just a question on, thank you, Chair. The question to staff. Are we able to contract something different on representation, or does the act prevent us from coming to a different solution? If we decided that we wanted to change that population, do we have that authority to do that by agreement?
Thanks through the chair to Director Grenier. So the number of directors is set out in a formula which is determined in a combination of the Local Government Act and our letters patent. So the section in the Act is the number of directors to which each municipality is entitled is the number obtained by dividing the number of votes to which that municipality is entitled by 5, or if otherwise specified in letters patent, by the other number specified. So essentially what that means is in our letters patent, for example, the voting unit is set at 3,250. So for every 3,250 residents, there is a single vote available at this board. And that, for example, is how the city of Merritt has a different number of votes to cast than the village of Ashcroft, even though they each have 1 director, because they have their different sides of that 3,250 threshold. So the voting unit itself is set by the letters patent. The fact that you have to divide that by 5 is set in the Local Government Act. So if the board recommended that revised letters patents be issued, which raised upwards our voting unit, then you would have, then the division of that by 5 would change the outcome. So if, for example, that was raised to 10,000, then that would reduce the number of votes to which a municipality was entitled, and the number of directors that it got as a result of that. So that's how that would happen. The division by 5 is set in law. The voting unit is set in the letters patent. We cannot unilaterally change either of those, but we can request that the voting unit be changed.
Supplemental.
Yes, so that last part who would we go to if we had come up with a magic formula that we thought was going to work? Who is it that we go to ask? Is the municipal affairs minister or the government itself?
Through the chair, it would go through for practical purposes, it would go through Ministry of Municipal Affairs. The technical term is the board would would request that the Lieutenant Governor and Council issue new letters patent. But yeah, that would be Ministry of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you. I'm next on the speakers list. I think for me, it might be wise of us if staff were to be able to put together a survey for the directors, everybody sitting around here, to write down maybe things that work really well or things that they think could be improved. Ultimately, this is, are we providing the best governance possible to our residents from every corner on that map? And I think sometimes people don't always speak freely how they want to speak because they're worried how it might be perceived politically for them from the residents, but as well around this table. And so for staff to put together a survey that would be unanimous coming in, so we can get an understanding of what happens to be, whether Councillor Bass thinks the board number is too big, or somebody thinks the boundaries are too big, some electoral area far out isn't getting enough services in certain things. Like, it'd be good to have a general understanding of what this board feels, and not just this committee. I would think it should go to all board members, and I don't know what other people's thoughts are about that, but really, we're sort of flying blind at this point until we collect a little bit of that data. Director Blackwell.
Yeah, I agree with the idea of a survey. I think that's a great idea. Then understanding, there's multiple factors here. I mean, I agree that the board is too large to be functional much longer. I think 27 is stretching it, especially if we get heated issues. We could be here for days or weeks if we start to get into things. But geographically, I know that's not part of this discussion yet, but we should also have that. I mean, there's areas that make absolute sense due to service area that we all filter into Royal Inland for medical services, almost commercially, business wise, a lot of stuff flows the rivers. But by that same logic, then Lillooet potentially should be part of the TNRD, or maybe everything from Ashcroft down should be part of a different regional district. Everything from Clinton up should potentially be part of the Caribou Regional District. So, you know, there's short-term and long-term discussions here. Changing the letters patent, the Local Government Act, both of those things are long-term. Those are 10-year discussions. None of that's going to happen fast. So what do we do to make this work better and prep for local First Nations? Because I think that will come before either letter patent changes or Local Government Act changes. I think the priority in Local Government Act changes will be inclusion of First Nations, not making things easier for us. I just don't see that. I would be very interested in, you know, it was only recently that I found out that, you know, people like Director Laird's area have more than one vote. I would like to understand the demographics of each EA and municipality. So as part of that sort of survey, I think that would be useful to understand, because land does not vote. People vote. So there's two issues there. Land doesn't vote, but there is the value of the property taxes, because that land does pay property taxes. There is the value of that, even though there's one person there, the value of that land does contribute to the taxation of the regional district, and we have to consider that. Same with utilities, same with all the other things that operate on those areas of the regional district. So it's a very, very complicated problem. It's not specifically just about human votes or value of it. There is a lot of different factors to consider when we're talking about representation.
Thank you, Director Morris, and then Director Hall. Director Morris.
Thank you. This is such a tricky area to even have the conversation about. So in my mind, I'm thinking one approach is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but definitely being brave enough to say, let's look at some unique, different ways of realigning if we're going to make some brave steps going forward for the next pieces, recognizing that the long-term changes in demographic are going to be there for us. We're going to see growth, we're going to see change. And so we do need to think about how do we do it a bit differently as necessary. So something as maybe difficult to say is something like, are there a couple of EAs that need to merge? If you use Area P as an example and you look how large that is and being covered by one individual. But if we looked at some other alliances amongst areas, that might not go over well as a concept, but I'm only saying it as a concept, that it then creates other windows of opportunity for where we want to go for the future as the TNRD. So it would be a brave one, and we might get a lot of negative results or feedback. But in any case, the second piece of that is the sensitivity and the need to incorporate how we look at all of our First Nations involvement and how it's going to go. So that aside, I have said nothing that is actually going to solve anything, other than I think there are a lot of various things that we need to be brave enough to put out on the table and talk about.
Thank you, Director Morris. Director Hall.
Thank you. Just with respect to your thoughts on a survey, I think it's rather imperative that we approach it, as a need to have to, gather some data, gather some information. It's a vast area as we know it. I mean, are we going to be looking at relocation, reallocation, realignment? I look at efficiencies, like as a TNRD, how efficient are we as a board, serving the needs of the communities that we represent, whether we're EAs, whether municipalities. And there comes a time when you look at the capacity that the board has, and I'm just a first time TNRDer here. But when I got on board here, I went, wow, this is vast. And boy, there's a lot of people here. But as I start to understand the necessity of it all, okay, I think that's what lends to what Mike's suggesting is a survey would help give us more information and data that would help us form, good decisions, moving forward. So, and if you think for a second that the First Nations representation isn't coming, it is. So I agree with Director Bass. Let's prepare for it and let's, welcome them, open arms.
Director Laird.
Thank you. Does anybody have any history? I know I don't know when this was it 1968 when this TNRD was put in place? I can't remember the year. But how did they come up with the lines that are on the map that have been here for so long? How did they decide there should be 10 EA directors? And, it would be nice if we could ever get any history on the original thought process that came into creating this. Is it done on population or is it done on area or?
Well, that sounds very similar to our board discussion 4 years ago that you were here. And I put that question out to the board. If anybody here knows as to why those arbitrary lines are drawn on there, and nobody had an answer. So that's part of the conundrum, that nobody knows how we actually began.
Wouldn't there be, there has to be something with them. Well, the municipal affairs has to have some idea how they created this. Because inside our areas, we have local improvement districts. And from what I understand, local improvement districts were here before the boundaries were and the regional districts actually showed up. So how we have, that's two different levels of government. Plus, and then we have regional district, local improvement areas, and municipalities. So we got three different levels of government and within the regional district.
Thank you.
It'd be interesting if anybody could.
CO Hildebrand looks like he has an answer. All the answers?
I certainly don't have an answer or near all the answers. Based on what I'm hearing, though, the survey sounds like an interesting way to maybe bring this forward, and we can provide as best we can a fact sheet of all these questions, kind of so you have a full picture of what we know. But one other thought that we were just talking about and have talked about in leading up to this discussion is Ms. Jeremiah could speak to about the ability to get a grant for a consultant to actually take and look at this. If Ms. Maria, Jeremiah could maybe just speak to that in general, that'd be great.
So in doing some research, and Deanna had done some of this before as well, but the Ministry of Municipal Affairs is, well, back in 2022, was willing to provide grant funding towards your boundary amendment. So while this wouldn't be happening until after the new census was done in 2026, I do know that other regional districts have received up to like $45,000 towards working with a consultant to have this done. It's also worth reaching out to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs just to build that relationship again and just see how we can work together, get that historical information, as well as get some facts and information to provide to you with respect to the boundary adjustments and the process.
Thank you for that, and it will take some time, I think, but, and supplemental from Director Laird.
I've just got one question around local improvement districts. Were they formed with letters patent the same way as our like all our municipalities and regional districts? So when you're going to remove one of those local improvement areas, it takes the provincial municipal affairs to agree with the changing of the letters patent, so that particular area disappears and is included either in a municipality or a regional district.
Thank you, and I think that's one of the many things that would be considered if anything were to happen on any external, internal boundary realignment or whatnot, and potentially that's what a consultant could look at as well. So I've heard a few things around the table. Having staff look to apply for a grant for looking at a boundary review, maybe a motion that somebody might want to put forward.
I'll make that a motion.
Moved by Director Laird, second by Director Morris. There we go. Thank you. All in favor on staff applying for a grant for boundary review? Thank you. And I had an initiative that I'd like to put forward for staff to do a survey amongst the directors. Thank you, Councillor Hall. And I think a lot of the discussion you have heard, and you can pick up the questions. We don't need to go through each question here today, but if we're able to work at that. And then was there one more initiative that came? Thought I heard a third one in between.
Yeah, sort of understanding more clearly the demographics of what we're talking about here. Population, mass, a fact sheet. Yeah, a broken down fact sheet.
Thank you, Manager Ellison.
Sorry, just as additional, we'll definitely develop a fact sheet, but if you go to the tnrd.ca webpage, under the About Us scenario, there's a Communities tab. It splits out each community by municipality, electoral area, and First Nations group, and then gives the demographics for each of the areas, but we can help summarize that to accompany a survey.
Thank you. A summary, and I think when we do get a fact sheet as well, looking at the weighted vote scenario for how many votes come out of this, would be worthwhile having on that, because other than the one person voting it, we don't really know who has how many votes unless it's on top of your head. Manager Jeremiah.
So this is something we could probably do in conjunction with the boundary amendment, because at that same time can't be done until the census is completed. Once they have those total population numbers, then they're able to, approve us increasing our numbers. The other part to that is that we also need to reach out to our member municipalities, get approval on what number they feel would be reasonable to increase the voting strength numbers to as well. So there's a lot of pieces to this big puzzle, but we can work through that process moving forward.
Thank you. Director Houghton.
Now, so far, we've talked about the surrounding boundaries of the TNRD or electoral boundaries. Are we going to be looking at municipal boundaries, including yours, in amongst this? Because they were set in stone, especially city accounts by the NDP government a number of years ago, 72, I believe. Now, there's 4 or 5 city councilors on this board, but it seems like we're talking about the outlying electoral area boundaries and either amalgamating them or changing them. So Just your thoughts here, Chair O'Reilly.
Yeah, I think from everything that I've heard on my tenure is there is not much appetite from the provincial government to expand municipal boundaries. In the same breath, also not to shrink municipal boundaries as to leave areas out, because what they'd been hearing was municipalities that have a far outlying small area, well, it's too expensive for them to service. Let's just put it into an EA. And the province really got on that quick and said no. On the flip side, and it was talked about when KGHM was looking to open up the Ajax mine, was, well, maybe the city of Kamloops should annex it because they can get the industrial tax. And they came back very quickly and said, no, you're not just annexing something out because you think you can get more tax revenue. But I would leave that to Manager Lois if he has any further comment, or really anybody around this table. And I see Director Blackwell has his hand up as well. So Manager Lois.
Thank you, Chair. The only things that I would add to everything you said is that so extension and reduction of municipal boundaries is fairly dealt with in some detail in the Local Government Act, which includes that before any extension takes place, the council of the municipality in question must obtain the approval of the electors of the municipality in relation to the proposed extension. And for reduction of a municipal area, again, a council must make a request and they must obtain the consent in writing of at least 60% of the electors of the area proposed to be excluded. So this is certainly not impossible, but it is certainly a major undertaking.
I have Director Blackwell, Director Laird, Director Grenier. Director Blackwell.
Yeah, I'm actually aware of a few expansions and reductions that have happened, because we've actually been looking at potentially doing a reduction in Clearwater to take out an area that was added as a last minute during the incorporation process that is actually problematic to the district of Clearwater, and would be better served, particularly with roads infrastructure by the Ministry of Infrastructure, Transportation and Highways. Yeah, I'm also aware that Barrier did a boundary expansion. Has that been completed at this point? Yeah, to take in a neighborhood that's quite recent. And I also believe that Fernie is in that process as well, because developers created a highly developed area on the boundary of the city of Fernie, which relies intensively on the city of Fernie for services, and therefore they took it into taxation. And both of those have happened in with the last 3 or 4 years. So it does happen. And how does that align with this? I generally think the trigger point on either one of those things is when they get too big or too sparse, or you know, too service intensive, the same way that a lot of municipalities are formed. So it does happen, but yes, it is not a cheap or quick process.
Thank you. And I would assume most likely led from the municipality. Director Laird.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on council when the city decided to expand boundaries into the regional district. The main reason we're looking at it, and it was the fact that the pipeline went through right on the edge of the city boundaries. So part of the thought process was, we'll expand out as far as we can, take in as much as a pipeline for taxes, obviously. And it went out, the boundaries were drawn. There was one section that voted not, over 50% voted not to be part of the city. So the city boundaries go around, and there's this little piece that is not in the city, it's still in the regional district. So when you get into changing city boundaries or expanding one way or the other, it can make more problems. But it was a great tax grab, I'll tell you that. Increased our revenues probably by 200,000 or 300,000 a year just with a gas line pipeline. The other thing, we're just going through an OCP discussion, and one of the discussions came up. We have the Mountain Festival site. It's the only site in BC that's actually zoned for concerts, and the city of Barrett keeps saying, well, we want to take it in. And so I was talking to Alex about how complicated it would be for the city to take in that piece of property. And it's a complicated process. I think it's more complicated now than it was when I was on council and we took other land in. So do our OCPs ever fit into boundary changes or, because, how does that, there has to be some relationship there, isn't there? I don't know.
Manager Lois.
Thank you through the chair. I think our OCPs, I mean, they don't really come into effect in boundaries in the sense of, say, we don't write OCPs with a plan of, and when do we expect this to no longer be part of our regional district? That, it doesn't come into play in that effect. What does happen is if there is a municipal extension into a regional district area, which is governed by land use legislation like an OCP, like zoning bylaws, then the municipality takes on that existing land use legislation which applies. And then at some point in the future, it can look at changing it to make it consistent with things that are already in place in the local government, in the municipality. And yeah, I'm familiar with some of the specific extensions that he's looked at in the past with Merritt. And yeah, there are some parts of the city of Merritt whose zoning, it was inherited from the TNRD when boundary extensions took place for whatever reason. And it left some fascinating anomalies that 20 years later, staff were looking at going, why is this? And then, of course, anyone who's using the land at that point, they have lawful non-conforming use, even if the rules are then brought into consistency with the rest of the municipality. So it can lead to some fascinating outcomes.
Fascinating. I don't know if I'd use that word, but you obviously have a passion and a real love for it. So Director Laird supplemental.
It's interesting. We're going through our OCP and we asked the question as far as density is concerned. And one thing that we hear very strongly in a regional district is we don't want any more people living here. And there's lots of issues around that. The biggest one is utilities. So when you're increasing population, most areas in the regional district, they bought with the concept of it being a very regional type of atmosphere. So they don't want to see large development in their communities. And that's one thing they have to take into consideration. How is the public involved in this process? How do they, if we make a decision, do we actually have to take it to the whatever area we're changing? Do they have a vote on whether or not they accept it?
Thank you for those comments, and I think staff probably heard those as well. And we'll go to Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Boundaries are lines on maps, but there's hidden boundaries too that I think we have to reflect on if we're going to look at the big picture. When I got to this town, I was quickly told that there's a fringe area policy. And I said, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're in the TNRD, but you got to talk to the city of Kamloops. Okay, so there's a whole policy behind the fringe area policy, which was basically don't grow in the fringe area policy because we want growth to happen within the city. So I ended up speaking to Randy Deal at the time, who was the city representative, and he said, our big concern is that we're going to see another River Shore. And I said, what's wrong with River Shore? It's a great golf course. People seem to be happy. He says, yeah, but all those people moved out of the city so that they didn't have to pay city taxes. And so we coopered together a deal where they had development cost charges in the city. And I said, well, I don't have development cost charges, but I can have hookup fees to hook up to a communal water system that I was building. And I'll make sure that my hookup fees are equivalent or greater than your DCCs. He said, okay, that sounds good. Then he said, now what about your park strategy and all the rest of it? I said, well, I'm creating a marina, I'm creating a golf course, I've created some of the backcountry lakes and all the rest of it to put money into fishing and all the rest of that sort of stuff. He said, yeah, he says, but your people are going to come and use the stuff in the city. And I said, well, yeah, your people are going to come and use the stuff on the lake and the golf course and the backcountry. And so it was settled on that basis that, yeah, it was going to be an ebb and flow. But the constraint to do anything in the fringe area policy, which is certainly the area right around the city of Kamloops, is a very real thing if you're talking about economic development and growth. But it's not just the fringe area policy, it's the agricultural land reserve. So the agricultural land reserve that was created in the Barrett government with using stereoscopic maps at 10,000 feet it was just a very quick exercise to identify areas that were excluded from development. And of course, when you're actually in the ranching business or trying to grow something, you have to consider that, yeah, it might be good soils, but it's got no water, or it's got lots of water, but it's also got lots of rocks, or the slopes are just not working in favor of a tractor that's going to tumble down the hill. And so the ALR, which isn't up here, the ALR is down south, is another hidden factor that you've got to contend with. In our case, we had 4 days of public hearings across the province of BC after cabinet declared it in the provincial interest. So the impediment to do anything immediately 17 kilometers from the city of Kamloops is incredible. Then I had a very wise fellow say to me, I think you should go to the end of the lake and talk to a guy named Chief Ignace, Ron Ignace. I said, why would I want to do that? You know, a guy from Ontario, I didn't know anybody or anything about it. Oh, I think it's a good idea to go talk to him. Well, I went to meet Ron, and Ron said, well, here's our planning rules. I said, what are you talking about? I'm in the TNRD. He says, well, this is our traditional territory. So when you look at electoral areas and you say boundaries, well, it's boundaries, it's fringe area policy, it's ALR, and it is First Nations issues that constrain what can happen in electoral areas. So then we say, well, how do electoral areas pay for themselves? They're like in Savannah, we got a community hall, we got a little park, we have a library from the TNRD. We can't really easily expand the population base. We can't easily expand the services and the utilities because we've been constrained by some of these other things. So I think that, I don't know if when we talk about electoral boundaries and what makes sense, I think we have to be looking at these other hidden impediments that are intended to be constraints of growth or have gotten in the way of prudent growth. Kamloops Lake, which is a 32-kilometer long water body, wasn't even mentioned in 30 years ago in the City of Kamloops tourism guide. They told you to go to Shuswap Lake. And they said, don't go to Kamloops Lake. When I asked them about it, they said, it's cold, it's polluted, and it's dangerous. Okay, and when I went to look at those things, none of that was true, but it was just the impediments that we seem to have grown up with. And that plan that I talked about yesterday, that growth to 2000, in 1989, their big concern was that City of Kamloops was constrained in growth and economic development. They were losing industries. They were looking for a way to grow. And I can tell you that the reason why Tobiano was supported and the reason why Sun Peaks was celebrated was because they were new economic developments with intensive capital use coming into the region. So when we look at city boundaries, boy, oh boy, I can tell you, Sun Peaks has had a huge impact on Kamloops because people want to be here and then go to Sun Peaks, or they want to go out and they want to boat on Kamloops Lake, or they want to golf at a really great golf course. And if we can look at it and say, yeah, okay, they may be out of a city boundary, but boy, they're really important to the growth. Think of all the lumber that's been deployed at Sun Peaks and Tobiano, out of Home Hardware and out of Rona and all the rest of it, and all the jobs that are created just because of those areas. Oh my gosh, but they're in the fringe area policy. So we have to think about those things. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Grenier. And potentially if we were to get a grant coming forward, that's things that would be considered as well from the person that would be looking at the boundary review. Any other comments? Director Onslow.
I'm not sure why that binged, but I would just be curious to know which other regional districts recently have been through this process and what the result of it was.
Thank you. And potentially we could have staff, there was a report going back previous board, that we had all that listed out of some ones that were recently done. And then so we could maybe send that out to this committee. I believe Manager Campbell had worked on that. I'm seeing some nodding.
Yes, I can provide that, the previous reports that were sent to the board, I believe in 2022 or
I
that
believe it was the
2023.
previous board. So it was 2020.
okay, there might have been another one with the creation of the committee as well.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
find them and send them out. At this time, Nanaimo, the regional district of Nanaimo is in the process of going through their boundary review. They've been doing this since 2020. And it's a long process.
Thank you. Director Blackwell.
Yeah, and I believe some of the Vancouver Island RDs are ahead of us on the incorporation of First Nations, and I think that is one of the things that's coming up in Nanaimo. I was speaking in Nanaimo at the BC Forestry Conference on community forests and Bill 20, and I actually talked to the former chief of the Nanaimo First Nation because he was there, and we had a really long conversation about integration of First Nations, but also hearing from local mayors about the service drain without taxation, the same thing that you experience here on the Northeast Shore, and how all of these things come into play with representation on the RD moving forward. So there is a lot here, and quite frankly, I'd be surprised if we make much progress other than to better understand what we have here in the next 2 years. But I think everything suggested so far is a good start at that.
Thank you. I have Director Laird next up on the speakers list, and I think for the most part, staff kind of hear what we're looking for, and we've all felt heard, I hope. Unless there's something burning from somebody else that wants to comment, we'll have Director Laird to close, and then we will wrap up this meeting. So Director Laird.
I just had a question around the effects of boundary changes within the regional district and all the different reserves that are within our boundaries. Are we involving the First Nations in our discussions? Because are our boundaries going to affect anything around their boundaries? And I'm not sure if we have that question to the staff already, but it's something that I think we have to look at.
Yeah, again, I think that would be taken under consideration based on the boundary review if we were to get this grant. But I don't think anybody should fool ourselves thinking we're going to get an answer in a year. When this was first brought forward in 2018, Scott, or Manager, no, anyways, a very long time previous to this board, 4 years ago, we knew it was going to be a long process, but that board at the time said, we got to start somewhere so we understand what we have now and what's coming in front of us. And this may not get dealt with this board, but at least we are on the path to providing the best governance possible for our TNRD residents. So Director Grenier has one last comment to close.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to First Nations, the two First Nations that I've had some discussion with, in the case of the Kamloops band many years ago, decided that they were going to address things like the Trutch cutoff claims. They were simply going to start buying up some of the real estate that was part of what they feel is their traditional territory. And then if they had fee simple title to it, then they were able to do that much more as owners of the land, as opposed to arguing with a provincial or federal government of whether they were entitled to the land or not. And the federal and provincial governments have started to fund those agencies to buy back from people who had legitimately bought land, thinking that they could have title to it. They've now bought back. And so there's this process of buying up land and then subsequently asking to incorporate it into their reserve or their lands. And that process is going to be repeated, or is being repeated, out in Skeetchison, where they have bought up several properties in the vicinity of their reserve, and their long-term intent is to incorporate that. And so they seem to have begun a process of consolidating what they feel is their traditional territories and their they're important areas.
Yeah, thank you, Director Grenier. And I think we got to be very careful when we talk about they and bands. We have multiple bands, as we have provided our land acknowledgement. We have many First Nations throughout the whole regional district. And ultimately, I think one of the things that we haven't said, well, you know, we think that First Nations may come around this table. We haven't even asked First Nations yet what
No,
they're wanting. We don't know what our bands want around us, and that would be something considered. But to surmise that every band has the same approach or wanting to do the same thing, I think we need to be very careful and respectful to our neighboring nations and our neighboring neighbors.
Okay, I would ask with respect, you let me complete my statement. Those are the only two experiences that I have directly. And it's been expressed to me that that was a way that they saw solving the issue that they were feeling with. So in terms of us presuming that they want to be at this table, and for us to presume that the way that we're talking about electoral boundaries, they're not talking about that. What they're talking about is consolidating their traditional territory, and that they want to have exclusive control of their traditional territory. And their complaint to me on those areas was, you seem to apply jurisdiction as the TNRD or whatever. We want to be the sole jurisdiction, not part of your TNRD, not part of your city councils. We want to be our own. So I think we have to consider that that the First Nations, we talk about it sooner than later, but I don't think that they're looking at participating with us. I think that they're looking at defining what areas yours are and ours. That's just from my perception, and I may be incorrect.
Thank you, Director Grenier, for those comments. Director Blackwell to close.
Very quickly, in the conversation with Doug White, who's also Queen's Counsel lawyer as well as being former chief of Nanaimo First Nation, his part of the discussion, because we were talking about Indigenous consultation on forestry, as Clearwater was the first case up. A member of the audience asked him, how did he see UNDRIP rolling out in British Columbia? And his first comment was, you realize when you use the term First Nations that there's an S at the end of that, and we're all different and we all have a different set of rules. And his second, so if you're expecting us to follow the rules of the province of British Columbia, those aren't our laws. And his second comment is, as far as how it will roll out, it was, I'll let you know in 25 years when we sort it out. So the end of the journey will be when we know how this rolled out. So we have to consider it in those terms as well, that we are not in control of this ride.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, do we have any new business? So for staff, I would say we talked in our TORs that we were looking at 2 meetings a year. Would it be enough time for you to have stuff together for us for April? And then we could decide, or do you need more time?
I don't see an issue with being able to provide you with the necessary information and put out the survey to understand your thoughts and opinions with respect to the boundaries. That'll give us time as well to reach out to the ministry and get some more information to provide to you. And in the meantime, also, I'll send out the reports. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seeing nothing further, we are adjourned.